All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to this month's edition of Form Check Friday. And you know what it is, right? If you've never been here before, if you've never witnessed one of these, what we do is we ask y'all to go to calgarybarbell.com and submit your lifts using the Form Check Friday link there. That will get you entered in to be potentially selected for us to take a look at you on the show. Before we get started, make sure to check out the new apparel. It just launched. It's really rad. Okay, so the way this goes is we're going to start with what we ended with last week. And what we ended with last week was Renelle. So Renelle was trying to make a decision between squatting barefoot. You can see here just in socks. That's how she normally does it. That's how she's most comfortable. And she also sent in a second set. We'll watch this one more time while I just continue explaining the situation. And she, she's worried about her depth here. She's not sure if her depth is where it needs to be in this set. So she also tried out some squat shoes, and she's not a huge fan of it, I don't think. She said she's tried cueing herself, with just the barefoot, whatever, to try to get a little bit more depth, but it doesn't seem to be doing the trick. So this was her attempt with squat shoes, and let's take a look. I mean, she wants us to try to compare the two and see which one seems to make more sense. Now, one thing I immediately notice in the set with squat shoes is maybe you get a tiny little bit deeper here, but you're also losing a lot of your bracing. She said she's messed with her cueing her toes out, used a wider stance, and now is trying to use squat shoes. So I think what happens here, unfortunately, is you're trying to be really upright in the squat shoes. And I think if you want to continue to use squat shoes, I would try to cue yourself a little bit more ribs down. I would try to allow your torso to lean a little more, because right, look at this shift in your torso angle on the way up versus on the way down. Your hip position changes, your hips come back a little bit, your knees come back a little bit, and you end up getting pulled forward slightly by the bar. Now, if we go back to your quote-unquote barefoot set, and we watch through this looks a lot more comfortable. You look a lot better braced with this. I still think we could probably initiate the lean a little bit earlier. So my number one thing here that I think is limiting you from getting depth is that you're trying to be too upright. And I think for your body shape, your limb length, all that kind of stuff, I think you're going to need to be a little bit more leaned over, and that's going to make it a lot easier to get to depth. Because what you're feeling at the bottom here is essentially as low as you can go with this kind of extension in your back. Right? You're trying to be very extended. You're trying to be very knees forward. You need to get your weight back on your heels more. You need to probably change your torso angle a few degrees, and that's going to allow you to get good depth. You can use a flat shoe. I don't think you need to use squat shoes. I think you can if you choose to, but I think both paths require further experimentation with a bit better bracing pattern. And we have a great video on the channel where I chatted with world record squatter, world champion, I believe, Liz Craven from Australia. And she talks about the ribs down cue and that bracing pattern. And that's one of my favorite explanations of that. So I'd recommend going and checking that out if you haven't. Maybe I'll get Dylan to link it in the description below. But I think, yeah, the thing for you to get to depth is more in your bracing here. And I think you should probably be able to get to depth in both squat shoes and flats. It's just going to take a little bit of practice. Now, if we can get this video to work here. All right, so up next we have David. So David's doing some bench here. David's been powerlifting for about a year, and he says his bench has kind of always been a problem for him. Now, he said he used to bench wider. He brought his grip narrower, and his bench went up 10 kilos. So that's great. Good for you. He says he's noticing some problems with his bar path, though, and hoping he can get that fixed and figured out. So let's take a look here through the set just one more time. So the first thing I'm noticing out of the rack is that we're really protracted, right? The shoulders are really far forward for the sake of those locked elbows. I think what I'd want to see is a little more retraction, depression, a little more bringing the chest up. It looks like we have a little bit of arch here, but it doesn't look like the shoulders are pulled back as much as they can be, or that the shoulders are pulled down as much as they can be. The other thing, we probably could use a little bit more leg drive, to contribute to that back tightness and chest position. Now we come down, we've got a relatively long stroke, and a lot of the times with longer range of motion bench pressers, you can get away with that narrower grip, a little bit of a sink. Sometimes that feels a little better. I'm not going to say that that's wrong by any means. So I think that's okay. The big thing is when you're in that position down here, it's really, really important to make sure that you're maintaining this upper back tension. So if you lose this upper back tension, then when you go to press, your shoulders are going to be out here, and we're going to lose a lot of pressing power. We're going to lose a lot of stability, and that's when you're going to see that bar path start to go a little bit wonky. So this first rep looks okay. We can see the elbows flare pretty early off the chest. Yeah, so you can see there's this big change in elbow position, and when the elbows swing back like this as you're trying to press up, now the elbow's behind the bar, right? So the bar is going to naturally list out this way. However, if we maintain something more like this position on the way up, the elbow's very slightly in front of the bar, and we're going to be able to push it back. So this flaring of the elbows early, now flaring the elbows isn't inherently bad. We just need to take into account where the bar is in relation to the elbows, and we need to maintain more upper back tightness. I think those are probably the biggest things. The other, really, really big thing that's always been, a large factor for getting the bench to move is going to be nutrition. If you're not in a caloric surplus, I would recommend getting into one. You're a young guy, you look lean, you could probably afford to gain a little bit of weight. And I think, that's going to do nothing but help your performance. And, you can always cut later if you feel like that's not the route you want to go. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention programming here. You mentioned specifically an 8-month plateau in your bench, and one of the things there when you're a relative novice, you've been training for about a year, is definitely getting on some good programming. Now you can obviously go to calgarybarbell.programs.app. You can check out our training app. It comes bundled with some coaching services that are all packaged in this nice community Discord we have. We do form checks. I do a lot of the coaching, help people modify their programs, all that kind of stuff. There's like 30 programs in there. It's fantastic, really great value. Check it out. But try those tips with the upper back and the elbows. Try to make sure that you're monitoring your nutrition, perhaps get yourself in a surplus, make sure you're sleeping enough at night. And I think all of those things combined will help you get that bench moving. All right, up next we have Brent here. Now Brent is an M2, Masters 2 category lifter. He's in the 93 kilo category, a fellow Canadian, I believe from out east a little bit here. Now he said he has first meet earlier this year. He hit 222.5, which is great. Congrats on that. It's a nice pull. He feels like he doesn't use his legs enough. He feels like he's got mostly like a back dominant deadlift. Now Brent also has what looks like a pretty full competitive calendar over the next year. He's got 3 meets leading back into CPU Nationals again here in 2023 in February. So the first thing I'm seeing here, and the first thing that usually correlates with a bit more of a back dominant deadlift, is this higher hip position. So I don't think this is inherently bad. You might just be really strong from this position. I mean, you got a 222.5 deadlift. We're not losing a crazy amount of position here on these working sets that are, we're up and we got 425 pounds, which is whatever, just under 200 kilos, maybe about 190, 185, somewhere in there. So you got a decent amount of weight on the bar. You're not losing really any position here. It's not like we're fish poling and have an unroll. So being a back dominant deadlifter for you might not be a bad thing, first and foremost. The other thing I'm seeing here is there's a fair bit of bend on this bar. I'm not sure what kind of bar you're using, but if you're competing in the CPU, you probably want to be making sure you're training on a nice stiff bar, because that's what you're going to be using in competition. It can be a big shock to go from a bar with a fair bit of bend in it to a competition stiff bar. When my wife switched federations back in the day from 100% raw over to the IPF, she noticed about a 10% difference going from the sort of bendier deadlift bar to a stiff bar. So, expect something in the range of that if you're used to using a stiff bar. Now, to actually get into a little bit of technical cueing here, there are a few things you could try to get a little bit more, leg drive involved in your deadlift. Whether or not that's going to be the ticket, it's tough to say. So what I would actually do is I would set up a secondary deadlift day where you're doing like leg deadlifts, call it whatever you want, but where you're trying to implement this difference in technique. Because I think what's going to happen is you're probably not going to be stronger with it right away. It's probably going to feel a little awkward, and it's going to take some time to suss out whether or not it's worth changing things up like this, right? So on this other day, what I would have you do is probably narrow your stance just very slightly. Looks like we've got this little bit of like internal angle from the heels to the knees, and in some cases, it's a little bit easier to use the hips if we're a little bit pointed out from the hips, right? If we're a little bit externally rotated from the hips. So if we bring these feet a little narrower and we work on trying to cue the knees out into the arms just slightly, that's going to help us get a little bit more out of the hips. And then the other thing I'm going to get you to do is on this secondary day, just try to bring your hips a half inch, an inch, maybe even 2 inches lower. It's going to cause your knees to travel a little further forward. That's fine. You will need to adjust how close the bar is to you, because if your knees go further forward and you try to pull, you're just going to run into your knee. So you might have to put the bar kind of out over the first strap of these shoes as opposed to right up against your shins like you are. So take a little bit of a difference in the setup. And then from there, just really practice being patient, practice trying to feel like you're pushing the floor away, like you're doing a leg press as opposed to a deadlift almost. So yeah, those would be the cues that I would use. I preface with a bit of a disclaimer that being more leg dominant might not be the ticket, but it is worth a try. And yeah, check the bar. Make sure you're not using like a bendy bar and then going to compete on stiff bar and being like, oh, why does everything feel so bad? Because that will happen, unfortunately. All right. And now we have Angel, not sure the pronunciation necessarily, but I dig your shirt. Our friend Omar's Rascal Apparel there. So Angel has been lifting a little over 5 years. So he says he's been focusing on, strength training and powerlifting for about 2 of those. He says he's 5'3", about 82 kilos. And what he's trying to do right now is he's trying to cut while getting stronger. So he's looking to compete. He says he can pull both sumo and conventional, but his conventional is definitely stronger. The other thing he mentioned is he's looking for meets around Houston, but he's not sure he wants to join a federation. So I'm going to hang on that last point for a quick sec. So first thing, anytime you do a competition, you're probably going to need to join a federation in order to do that meet. Unless you can find like an unsanctioned for fun gym meet. If you want to do even a local meet, a lot of times you're going to have to join a federation. Now, excuse me, as far as I know, you can join multiple federations. It's just once you get to a certain level of competition within certain federations, you might have to make a decision for one federation and therefore against another. What I would say is find any meet that lines up with your training schedule. Go ahead and join the federation. If you don't like it, you can quit. It is going to be a bit of an extra cost, right? Most federations have a little bit of a federation fee or membership fee included, so you'd have to pay that, but that's kind of how the sport works at that level. So Angel here basically was just looking for any tips with his deadlift. So I want everybody in the comments below to give any tips they have for Angel on his deadlift here. Any tips for maybe, trying to increase his strength on a deficit. That's maybe something a few of you are familiar with, and maybe something that other people are trying to get a little bit more of a read on. So I'm asking for everybody to go ahead and give their positive feedback and constructive feedback in the comments below. And I will be back next month to start off here where we left off. Make sure you're checking out the vlogs every week. We're documenting all of our training leading into Commonwealths. And come by the streams, check out the apparel. Bye.